Before Easter, we were reading the story of a family, the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it ended with God saving their family through the story of Joseph. God's promise for countless descendants were now in the hands of the Egyptians. Now remember, God promised 400 years of affliction in Egypt, all the way back in Genesis 15:13. And in the first chapter of Exodus, God's promise comes true. The Egyptians didn't like how big the Israelites were getting, so they decided to enslave them. But they continued to grow, so the Pharaoh decided to kill off all the newborn Hebrew boys. So let's open our Bibles and read Exodus 2, 1 through 25. In this section, we get introduced to a new character. His name is Moses. And Moses wasn't a firstborn, he wasn't from the tribe of Judah, and as we'll see, he didn't always do what was right. But God had a plan for him anyway. He was born into suffering, raised by a foreign king, and betrayed his own people. Not a great start to a life of serving God, right? But that's the interesting part of this story, that God prepares us to serve him. We may not hear a voice from God, or we may not know exactly what God wants us to do in the future. But we do know that every situation, including the ones we have no control over, are part of God's plan to prepare us for service. So think about this. How can God use both good and bad circumstances to prepare us for the future? God can use any situation, but he often used good situations to help us feel empowered to serve him. But he also uses bad situations, often to show us how to rely on him. Even more than that, and we'll see this in the story of Moses, that God puts other people in our lives to prepare us for service. So can you think of someone that God used to help you grow into the person you are today? See, God wasn't going to use a toddler to deliver his people. And so Moses grew up. We pick up the story when he was fully grown. So take some time and read Exodus 3, 1 through 24. Have you ever had a time when something bad happened, but it ended up for the best only to be ruined by an even worse event? That's about what happened to Moses here. Moses grew up in riches and power and had everything available to him. But his anger for the mistreatment of the Hebrew people led him to kill an Egyptian guard. He gets exiled to Midian and meets a family that takes him in. And then when it seems like life is starting to make sense for Moses, God shows up. That's because God has a place of service for each of us. No matter our past, no matter how unqualified we may seem, God had a plan for you to serve him with your talents. So Moses is out shepherding. Sure, yeah, that's a word. When he notices that there's a bush on fire, but it's not burning. So he heads toward it, and out of the bush comes the voice of God, instructing him to take off his sandals. God tells him that he is the God that promised descendants and blessings to his family, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he tells him that God would use him to help rescue his people from slavery. Let's be honest, Moses really isn't a big fan of God's plan. He says, "Who am I?" Hold on here real quick. If God asked you to do something kind of crazy like this, what character flaws would you feel that would get in the way? Who am I is a pretty valid question. Moses was a foster kid, raised in privilege, traitor to his people, a murderer, and now in exile. He didn't feel like the leader of a nation, much less his own sheep. But God responds in verse 12. He says, "But I will be with you." So often, God is not looking for the smartest, most connected, most outgoing, or even someone that really has it all together. God is looking for the person who simply trusts that God will be there, no matter how tough the situation. So how does God's presence help you serve Him when you feel unqualified? God had a plan for service for each and every one of you. He has a general plan that you would follow Him and call others to do the same. We read this in Matthew 28:18-20. He's talking to the disciples, the ones who followed Him, and He tells them to go and make disciples. But not only that, to baptize them and to teach them to obey His word. And that's the call for everyone, to be a disciple that makes disciples. But God also has a specific plan for you. For me, He called me to full-time ministry when I was sitting on a bench at Tanglewood the summer between my sophomore and junior year of high school. For others, teaching. For others, mission work. For many, being a God-centered parent or spouse. Whatever your calling is, God desires that you trust that He is with you. And if you lean on Him, you will succeed. So maybe this week, you should take some time and ask God what His specific calling is for you. And in the meantime, you can continue to chase after your general calling to both be and make disciples.